Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Yabba dabba doo ya.
All right. Thanks, Chris Tomlin. No, who
Chris
was
Rice.
that? Chris Rice. I knew it was one of the Christian Chris's.
I introduced my kids to that last night, and
That was a mistake.
they didn't know who any of the cartoons were. They're like, "What do you mean, Yabba dabba doo?" They did know Scooby Dooby Doo, but they're not quite into. They didn't have Bluey on there, so they didn't care.
Oh, yep.
I feel bad for Chris Rice in a lot of ways because that had to have just been like ruined his career pretty much because he couldn't play any show without people being
Like nothing serious.
Play the cartoon song. He's like, okay, but I wrote like a catalog of other worship songs, but sure.
Rachel, do you know about this song? You have a puzzled look on your face.
I don't know.
It was a very theological question. I think
theological.
I was thinking the other day, what if cartoons got saved? They'd start singing praise in a whole new way, and then he uses all like the yabba dabba doo ya, Scooby Dooby Doo.
They're all saying hallelujah.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Yep.
So.
Nope. Never heard.
Which it was like a hidden track on that song, on that album too. So you had to like wait. Remember when that was a cool thing when the hidden.
Yeah,
tracks?
like turn it around. It was like backmasking it.
No, that was different. That's like a Black
Rachel, you
Sabbath
can
album.
YouTube it later.
Okay,
I probably won't join, but
yeah, if you play it for your kids, I mean, at least like my kids, like when they first heard it, they just listened to it nonstop. So
now we have the transition track for later on in the podcast.
Yeah,
so that's good.
There you go.
So today is Friday, 9/11, September 11th. So this would be the 19th anniversary of September 11th. I thought maybe we would just take a minute and kind of maybe share some stories about where we were when it happened, what we were doing. If you don't volunteer to start, I will pick volunteers.
I can go. I'll go. I was right up the street, actually, Harry A. Burke High School. So up the street from Christ Community Church. That's where I went to high school. I was a freshman. And, this is before phones, social media. I definitely didn't have a cell phone at the time.
Oh, cell phones. I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think they were phones.
Yeah, phones. But like social media, all that. So I was in U.S. history class when I found out, because our teacher usually was like homeroom, so she'd just have like the news running, and then we saw it. And I remember going to my Spanish class and telling my teacher, and she I kind of was a jokester, so she just was like, "No way, you're lying. You're just trying to disrupt the class." I'm like, "No, seriously, like look on the TV." So she turned on the TV, and it was just kind of like one of those surreal moments. It was like, the first plane had hit the tower, and so that was like the mystery point of like what had happened. Was this an accident?
Yeah.
And then like throughout the rest of the day, I just remember that's pretty much all our classes, focused on was like finding out more information. And so, yeah, surreal. And I had just gotten back from a trip like the day before, so even then it was like surreal. Like, oh wow, I was
Oh, you were flying?
Yeah, the day before.
Oh,
Not that Omaha was like a part of it. And then I remember like Omaha because President Bush had come to Omaha, or at least Stratcom and all that kind of stuff, and so there was that link as well. So that was me.
Well, I was 8. I do remember it though. Like I remember the day very specifically, which is I don't have a good memory of my childhood, but I remember I was in our living room and my parents had turned the TV on and we were watching, and I like just remember seeing it happening, and I was like, I walked to our front door and it's like a glass front door, and I just like looked. I'm a kid, so I have no idea what's happening. So I'm just like walked to the door, looked out, and was like, there's gonna be a plane that's gonna come and hit our house. Like I was like legitimately scared for like weeks that a plane was going to come and just like hit our house, because that's what they were doing. And so I just remember I was almost like at that age where I didn't really understand what was happening, but it was scary. And then just remembering all the intense like procedures that they took at the airports, and like it just really got intense at like for traveling and stuff like that. I remember that a little bit, but yeah, so it was just kind of a scary moment for me because I just didn't really understand what was happening.
Yeah, scary. And then you probably like had your emotions and then the emotions of everybody around you, like picking up, like trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was crazy.
I was homeschooled. Surprise. And so I was at home when it happened, and I don't know how I turned on the TV. because homeschoolers don't watch TV.
Yeah.
But somehow it was
You were
on.
at home when everything happened.
Yes, yeah. So I remember calling my dad because it was playing on the TV and he was like, record it because he was at work. So, and then I remember like pulling out a VHS tape because like no DVDs, and I put it in, pushed record, and then I remember the second plane hitting like right after I had pushed record, and I'm like, I just couldn't comprehend everything that was happening at the time. It was just a lot to take in. I think I was 17, and so just processing through that, it's like you can't. And then it was like, the whole day and days after that, like processing like what happened. And then it'll be 2 years ago, about almost to the day, I went to the 9/11 memorial.
Oh, wow.
And how intense that is emotionally to go. I would recommend everybody go, but it's like they have the stairs that people walk down, like the tower, and there's a fire truck. This was one of the most vivid things for me. They have a fire truck that is like melted in half. Like it's still all together, but like the ends are just melted almost to the ground of just like how intense and how hot that fire was. It's still like 19 years later, we said.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you still feel like the tragedy and the pain that surrounds that. So how about you, Eric?
Yeah, I was I was at a team meeting in the morning for a Christian bookstore where I worked, and I don't remember how we like heard about it because I worked the night shift that day, but I had to come in early for the meeting, and somehow somebody heard that something was happening, and we turned on the TV in the kids section, where you had all the fun toys and things like that. And so here we are watching this tragic event play out in the kids section of a Christian bookstore. So we, same kind of scenario. I think everybody had tuned in after that first plane had hit. And you just didn't know what you were in for. I do remember specifically POD was releasing their album that day.
Oh.
And we had a big release party planned. We were going to crank up some Satellite and, really have a good time. That didn't really pan out that way. But I went home after the meeting. And by the time I'd gotten home and turned on the TV, that's when I saw the second plane. It's in times like that when things, I think it echoes to all the times in history, even like with this pandemic we're experiencing now. It echoes that when things are out of the ordinary, when our routines change, when something happens that is unexplainable, we just, as a society and as humanity, we just start to try to like rationalize it in our own ways. And sometimes that can be good. Sometimes that can lead to dangerous things. But I just know family members who thought, oh, this is like the rapture's going to happen soon, or like just different things. Like their brains just went all over the place to different scenarios. And it's just, it's one of those things that's interesting to rationalize. I remember, mentioning like Bush flying in because the bookstore was out in Bellevue. And so you saw like the decoy Air Force One, and then the other one. I mean, I don't know which one is the decoy. I'm not. I don't work for the
You're not
rumors.
privy to.
Yeah. So, no, but it's just one of those things where it leaves a lasting impact on you, and it's nobody forgets where they were right when that happened. But
yeah, and there's so many things that harken back to that are contrasts. I think between then and now. Like I don't remember, and I was in high school, ever a time where it felt like, despite differences, like America was more united overall. Like it was September, and it wasn't a year of an election, that year, but just I remember like a lot of just unity and just seeing things I had never seen out of like people like searching for God.
Church attendance was at an all-time high.
Yeah. So there was a lot of worry, and I think a lot of those worries sometimes create different responses. And now I feel like there's a worrisome time, and it's obviously much more extended, but like the responses, police and firemen were like heroes and could do no wrong in that moment. And not to say they didn't do anything wrong, but it was just a different temperature around all of that type of stuff. And so I think to even be living in 20 years later and having somewhat of a grasp on what was happening then, I was a freshman, like I said, So I wasn't an adult, still adolescent, but like to be looking at like even conversations around police and all that kind of stuff now, and you weigh like the tensions between who some of the greatest heroes were inside of those moments. And like you brought up that fire truck, and so yeah, it's just a different time.
Yeah, for sure.
So
it's just an example of living in a fallen world, and it's a reminder that evil exists. And I think so many times that's when we have the hardest time accepting it, when these things happen that are so tragic. And it's like we have to so many times as a human try to find an excuse for why it happened, but it's like, well, we live in an evil world, you know, and evil stuff happens. And that, as terrible as it is, that's something that, you know, you almost have to accept.
Yeah, it feels gross sitting with that, you know,
Yeah.
but you're right.
All right, up next, headlines. This week in headlines, our first one comes from KETV.com. That's Omaha. That's local news for those of you listening outside of the Omaha area. It says, we had to do what we had to do. Some OPS families moved to other districts for sports. So OPS is Omaha Public Schools. This is a story about one specific family, but there are others that are doing this where they're moving to another zip code so that their kids can participate in high school athletics. So this, we talked a little bit about, like we kind of hit on some of this when we were talking about the Husker football season not really happening normally. But this is again just showing like how dedicated these families are, and just if you watch the interview, the dad talking about like having like needing to move for this, and like he was like getting emotional about it because he knew how much, you know, this football career meant to his son.
Yeah, and we're go Jess, go.
I thought it was just neat to see, like through that, reading the article, seeing his interview, it was like he loves his son, and like he was so compelled. Like I was picturing like just being his child, and like my family is moving because they believe in me. How much confidence that would put in somebody, and then just like the love, like what a cool example.
Yeah,
it's like one of the first things I thought, because I wasn't thinking, okay, how is this going to affect high school football when we originally talked about the Husker article? But wow. Okay,
Yeah.
Alex, now you can go.
Thank you. No, I mean, we're in a unique situation just in Omaha where like literally every other district in the entire state besides OPS is playing football and sports like that. And so I think that's part of the difficult conversation around this is like there's one district, and inside of the city limits there's a lot of different places that you can move, and it's difficult. My initial thought is, yeah, that's awesome for his family. I'm the guy that always was, you know, would like play and finally like earn my starting spot because I wasn't super talented, and then like, you know, I remember in college someone way more talented coming back, Mr. Kaiser, to play basketball, and so I'm like, I finally earned that spot. And then like somebody else comes in that you didn't think was going to be there, and you're like happy for them, but you're like, dang, you know, for that other kid that's like, hey, he's a senior and he's really good, but who, you know, what about that other family? And that conversation they're having with like, well, yeah, because someone else from another district that you have nothing to do with like came in and just took your spot as a senior. And we don't know all the situations and all that, but I think that's the part that is a bummer for me as I hear it. I feel bad for that other family.
Yeah, I feel like there could be a lot of different situations that play into this. I mean, I know some families, like for people, it was like how they were going to go to college.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go to college only if I can get a scholarship for playing sports.
And I think that's what this story was.
Yeah. So it's like that situation, it's like you kind of are like, okay, that totally makes sense. Like that is how they are going to be able to pay for, you know, this future. I think maybe in some instances it is like, okay, how much are you really prioritizing sports in your life and your family? I mean, because that's not just if they have siblings, like all of their siblings are gonna have to change schools, and like, you know, can you imagine like being a sibling of that brother or sister or whatever who are playing the sports, and like, oh, we're all gonna have to move and get new friends and, you know, all this stuff just so that they can play sports at this school? Like that would just be a lot of sacrifice for, you know, for a kid to play sports. I don't know.
And I mean, as someone who didn't grow up with that lifestyle, like I didn't play sports or anything. My parents weren't about the extracurriculars. It just seems insane to me. Like I read this story. I mean, I can feel the emotion behind it, and I can sympathize with that, but it's still just like, I just don't.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It's just hard to imagine. Like, what if this guy just ends up going to veterinary school or something like that? Like, what does his dad feel like that was all for naught? Like, does he have to live with guilt because he made his parents move, and maybe it like caused a financial issue in their family? Like, I mean, there's just all these, you know, different variables that could play out, and it's just one of those things where I'm trying to like be as sympathetic as I can when you hear this story, but part of me is just like, oh, it feels a little bit selfish in the way. It's just to be like, well, I'll just take my ball and go home kind of a attitude. But I also get that there's a lot on the line for these students. So
yeah, and it's so unprecedented. And I think another part is people have said, you know, it's just sports, you know, to some people, but for some people, like literally that's, you know, their ticket out of a bad situation. It's their ticket into community. And we're seeing even in Nebraska, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I think people have kind of poo-pooed like, oh, it's just, you know, it's just sports. Yeah. But how many other things that funds at the University of Nebraska? Yeah. And so it's like, hey, maybe your kid really likes playing in a band or like being a part of a musical theater type of thing. And really the ticket that feeds a lot of that is the sporting, you know, thing. And so, Nebraska's having to cut a lot of extracurricular things outside of sports that other people don't get opportunities in because of this. I mean, we talked about Chadwick last week and his opportunity to go to get a scholarship and be in a musical theater kind of thing. And maybe something like that isn't provided 10 years down the road because of, you know, how many millions of dollars shortfall. So I think people don't realize either on the other side, like how much just our economy and so many things are built around, you know, the sport on a Saturday, whether you like it or not. But like if your band is probably not going to be at the school much longer if there's not a football team or a basketball team for them to play for. The marching bands would probably go away. You know, a lot of opportunities that people work
You're just going to.
You might be offending a lot of people right now. I'm scared for the comments that you're about to get from these band people. Like,
I'm just saying there's a lot of
bands are pointless unless they're
No, I think
That's
bands
not
are great.
true.
No, I think bands are great. I'm saying that a lot of times we don't think about all the repercussions just because we're selfish people and we just think like, oh, I don't like that, I don't dig that. Yeah, it's dumb.
Yeah, I would hate to be that dismissive of it, but I do think that there's a glorification of it in this country that they do elevate it above other types of arts. Yeah, and it's one of those things where like.
Are we talking about sports or
sports
bands?
In general?
Okay.
I'm just saying like that's elevated to a level where it is kind of the paramount thing. It's the achievement above all other achievements that your child can do. And it's like, it causes you to like kind of lose sight of other things that you could identify in their lives. Like, and plus they spend all these years trying to get good at this thing that is literally like, if they're thinking, oh, I'm going to make it to the NFL, that's like winning the lottery. Like the odds of being an NFL player, that's like winning the lottery.
Now you're crushing people's dreams.
I'm just saying you're spending all of this time and effort and energy into this thing that like, if they are not 100% dedicated to it, they might as well move on to something else. Like you're wasting your time, but parents want to like kind of live vicariously through their kids. And like, there's a lot of complicated issues that come with it on all sides of it. And it's just as a society, we elevate that and go, this is more important than the arts.
I'm going to also speak like for the parents that like you see your child love something so much. Yeah. It's like, what would you do for that child? Like, even if it's just through high school, it's like, hey, this is something we love. I connect with my child through this. Like, I want to support them. And there is a lot of love. There's a lot of camaraderie and family time that comes through that kind of stuff too. And then when you were talking, Alex, I'm also thinking about, you know, what about the kids that are awesome football players that can't move? Like their families aren't moving, and like seeing that and the disappointment that they have and what opportunities that they're going to miss because they're not able to have that opportunity. I don't know. I'm thinking about them too.
Yeah, I think it's just a bigger issue than a lot of times it meets the eye. Like, it's just around sports, but so many of, like, I played sports growing up, but I have a sibling that loved the arts and was in every musical and all of that kind of stuff, which was awesome. But like, for our boosters at our school, a lot of what paid for that kind of stuff, or even when I was in school, that was a big part of it. And so we don't think of like, hey, it's not just affecting your kid because they have a different passion. It affects a lot more than I think we realize. And so
we'll just need to take like the gross income from Hollywood, Broadway, and the music industry, and then compare that to the athletic world, and we'll have an answer. I'm sure there's a mathematical equation.
You do that math.
we can settle it. No, there's a lot of nuance to these types of conversations. Our next headline comes from CNN.com. It says gender reveal parties are destructive from the top to bottom. This is an opinion article. I will preface that a little bit, but it's really the fact inside of the opinion that we're going to be talking about. And that's that the catalyst for these large forest fires that we're seeing in California, they've now traced it back to a gender reveal party. Where it says a smoke generating pyrotechnic device is what's causing the fires that are raging through San Bernardino National Forest right now.
Oh my!
I cannot believe that.
Is that a fancy word for a firework?
What I said?
Pyrotechnic
a smoke generating pyrotechnic device. Yes.
Okay. I got to bring it down to.
Yeah.
It's Big Willie's gas bomb. Like, I think that's what they're called at the fireworks tent. But we did talk about gender reveals way back in like episode 19. So if you want to hear us talk about the gender reveal
way back
parties, we can talk about that. But it is crazy that, this stuff, like, wasn't it? Well, I think when we talked about it then, it was like someone either died or got seriously injured by a car that they blew up that was going to reveal.
They died.
Yeah, they died.
Yeah.
That's right.
It was like an ant that got hit by something.
Shrapnel.
And she died.
Yeah.
At the party.
Oh my goodness.
So these gender reveal parties are
why
kind
are
of
they just it's like you're one upping the next person. Like, why do we have to complicate it?
Yeah.
I mean, when we revealed the gender of one of our babies, literally we held 2 bags of ice and it was like ice baby, and I was holding like a blue balloon. Like,
yeah,
you can get the point across.
It's a boy.
Ice baby. But
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That is,
to me, I
would feel terrible.
Yeah. I feel like it kind of just shows like the culture of America almost, like on kind of an extreme, but of like, look at me, look at all my awesome stuff that I have, and look what, look at this. I don't really care who it affects or, if it's hurting anyone. It's like about me and I, this is what I want to do. I don't know. It just kind of is like an extreme of just, I feel like our culture of like all about me. Who cares if it hurts anyone or whatever? It
reminds me of our digital conversation we had of just things being on social media. And it's like, somebody's going to see this, so I have to do something big to get a lot of likes and a lot of views.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. And it just feels selfish, like in a lot of ways, to be like, oh, we wanted to have this really grand reveal and now half of California is burning because of it. Like, it's just, it's nuts. I saw another report today. I mean, wherever you fall on the global warming argument, like that, they keep tracking like how many degrees warmer the planet is, and they're saying that there's potential to go up like 2.7 degrees, which we're like soon, and we're up like 2 degrees from the 1800s is where we're at now. So it's just kind of showing how fast the Earth is getting warmer. Wherever you fall in that science, that we're not going to debate that here, but it's interesting to look at like the way things are affected, because the forest fire, it's so dry, it obviously got way bigger than it probably would have if it wasn't that dry. And then you've got these hurricanes in the Atlantic, and it's just there's a lot there to kind of dissect and try to parse that information and go, okay, like where do all of our responsibilities lie as being, good stewards of what we've been given with this planet? Like, whether you agree with global warming or you don't, like, I still think there's certain aspects of that where it's like, well, we should have some sort of responsibility to care for this planet that we've been given.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm just like, should we have a conversation about recycling? That'd be a fun one.
I love to recycle.
And just stewardship of I think that is all interesting, and I'm assuming that this couple or whomever did this probably, obviously, if you told them in hindsight, you're going to burn down California, like they would have
maybe they
chosen not to. And so I'm assuming the best heart of these people that they didn't try to do that. But it would be a weird thing to live with, or even for that kid to live with.
I thought about that.
Like how there's a legacy, so that'd be very interesting maybe, but maybe they'll grow up to be a football player. Or maybe they'll grow up to be a
You're
scientist.
still stuck on that conversation, aren't you?
They'll grow up to be a scientist, and
I'm sure they're just going to play the oboe. Okay.
Solve COVID.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we're going to be discussing gossip.
Gossip, that's none of my business. What they think about me.
So, I've got a really good story for all of you I'd like to share.
Tell us, Eric.
Okay. It's about Minister Mark Ashton. You're not going to believe what I have to tell you.
What did he do now? Did he send you another email?
I don't know. I feel
asking for more gift cards.
I feel funny about this.
No, I don't. I was trying to have some really good gossip, but I like my job. So,
Wait.
I actually don't have anything. But no, that's our topic today. We're going to be talking about gossip in the church, gossip, that's not a word. Gossip in like our Christian lives, what that looks like. So why don't we start off with let's just try to answer the question, what is gossip? Like, can it take multiple forms? Can it be right under our nose sometimes? Maybe it's unintentional.
I think my idea of what gossip is has changed over the years. I mean, I think initially of like high school drama gossip of like
your burn book.
Yeah, like with your best friend talking about this girl that was, flirting with your crush, and then you're like, well, her outfit's ugly anyways, blah, 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 whatever.
Gossip Girl, XOXO.
Yeah, that's what I think of initially.
Mean Girls.
But I think obviously my idea of it has changed a little bit over time, so.
Yeah. I mean, her outfit was ugly, to be fair.
I mean.
Jess, what do you have any, what do you think of when you hear the word gossip? Is it people just talking bad about one another?
Well, Rachel, you were just talking about people about being in high school, and I think it's changed, but we're still using the same context of things, just as adults.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not, oh, she was flirting with my crush, but it's like, oh, did you see how she acted with her kids? And like, what is she wearing? I mean, I think things like that are still happening. Just we're changing the language a little bit.
Well, yeah, and it's like, as a kid, you learn, like, you're having a temper tantrum and you're, kicking and screaming and crying and yelling. But, you might still have like a tantrum later on in life as an adult, but you've learned how to make it socially acceptable or appropriate. And I think that we've done the same thing with gossip too, of like, we've made it more socially acceptable, even though it's the same exact thing, kind of what you're saying. It's so
I am like I could come up with a lot of different what do I think it is, but for me sometimes I need to have like a definition to go off of.
Webster's.
Yeah, to be able to like wrap my mind around what is it actually, and then just helping us like frame up, are we talking about the same thing? Because I do think there's a lot of iterations of gossip that we could get into. So when I looked it up,
tell us
today, using the World Wide Web, it said casual or unconstrained conversation or reports about other people. So I think it's a conversation about other people, typically involving details that are not confirmed as being true. And so, for me, as I hear that definition, it's, conversation just about someone other than myself and the other person in that conversation that I might know information about them. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but me just talking about someone behind their back, I guess, is typically how I would define it. And I think that kind of supports what that looks like. My problem is I am so good at justification of gossip and things like that it gets more and more difficult to navigate what that looks like in my life. And I think this is one of those conversations that like we see in scripture, like God's not a big fan of gossip and like talking badly about other people.
Comes up a lot.
Yeah, it does come up a lot. And it's one of those that we don't talk about. We don't address like head on a lot in the church. And sometimes we're the worst gossipers, or I've been in circles, or I, at times even been one of the worst gossipers, but able to justify it by means of like, I care for this person.
Yeah, wanting to help.
Or I'm a prey gossiper, or like those types of things, and having the most accurate information, or not even the most accurate, the most juicy information, so I can be praying for people, but people to know I'm privy on information.
Alex, can you go into a little bit more what you're talking about when you say prayer gossiping? Because I think that's true, but can you like flesh that out a little bit more for like maybe an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and I think there's people that there's the full detail prayer gossipers, and then those that want you to like want more. So I think the full detail person would be like, Jesus, I know you know about Jess and her addiction to chocolate, Lord, and I know we all believe that you can heal her of that addiction, but like she never told, like you didn't tell anybody else in this room about that addiction that I just told everyone. So it's gossip. Or there's the other form, and it's like, Lord, I got my friend Jess, she's going through so much right now. There's just strained relationships in her life, and Lord, the details, but
why is everyone in your example prayer from the South?
I don't know.
Because
they're the worst.
I get what you're saying. So then you're kind of leading, like, then people kind of get drawn into that gossip too, because somebody's going to pull you aside and say like, man, we prayed for them, and like, what's going on? Like, I care too.
Yeah. So I think that we can do that in prayers where it's like, well, they didn't really share that with me in confidence to like share it with everybody. So
I feel like I don't struggle with that one as much as I struggle with venting. Like I like to vent about things with, my husband.
Tell us
or my
more about
friend,
that, Rachel.
Or, about my podcast castmates.
I feel like you've probably vented about us, haven't you?
I think that's a big like cover up that people use, as like, I'm just venting, like I just need to get it off my chest, or something like that. And I've used that multiple times. So
especially when you have like your safe people, it's like, it still doesn't mean it's not gossiping, even when you're talking with your safe people.
Right. Yeah.
And there's something very appealing about it in general, though. Like, especially, I think when you mentioned the kind of the tease, and people just latch onto it. I know I'm as guilty of it as anybody. When someone will bring something up, okay, what did you like? If they're like, oh, I can't say anything.
Yeah.
Well, then you might as well just cancel all your plans, because I'm going to nag you for the rest of the day until you tell me what you were talking about. Because it's just, it drives me crazy. I'm like, I got to know now. Like, there's something out there.
I feel like that happened a few weeks ago on the podcast where I think I was trying to describe something. Yeah. And I don't even know. And maybe, we can talk about if that was gossip or not. But like, I'm like, I saw something, I was surprised by it. And then, it was like.
Yeah, you were gossiping on the podcast.
But you were teasing a little.
Yeah, I was
and
teasing
you
it a little
say
bit.
Who the person was.
Yeah.
And then after the podcast, I kept nagging you, and you wouldn't give them up. So
yeah, and so there is
Alex.
that difficult. Yeah.
That's a real life example.
We're all really proud of you.
There it is.
I think there is a tie in gossip where we want to be liked. We want to have credibility, and sometimes information about other people equals like being in or having credibility. And it's just that underlying desire to be liked, to be wanted, to have information. I think it's like a deeper need that we have that we try to fill when we feel like we need to do that.
Yeah. Even on the other end, I was trying to think through, well, why do I feel the need to like vent about people or get things off my chest or talk about people? And that even goes back to an underlying like identity thing for me of like something about that situation or person is threatening my own identity. So I feel like I need to, like validate that that's not really a threat, like, or like kind of get off my chest, like, well, they did this, like, it wasn't my fault, or like this happened, and so, they're the ones in the wrong. I don't know. I feel like it's a deep like identity thing when you start. It's funny because you're talking about other people, but really when you think about it, it does go back to your own identity.
I was saving this quote for the end because it was going to be the home run, but it fits too well with this conversation you're having right now. I don't even know who said this, so sorry, I'm not going to cite you. But it pretty much was. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but gossip says, "I'm strong and they're weak," and the gospel says, "He's strong and I'm weak." And I thought that was like such a good quote because it is a lot about what it is because you have power over someone else. You're holding leverage over them by being like, "Oh, I've got this information that you want." And because you want it, then you're kind of susceptible to that. And then usually ultimately it's just a way of boistering yourself and making those people look bad in some way or another.
Right.
Where like what Jesus brings us in the gospel is something totally different. It's like we're the weak ones and he's the strong one, you know?
Yeah, that's so good. I was in a Proverbs commentary and I went back and looked it up because I remembered it was one of the things that as I was thinking about churches and what destroys churches, and it mentioned that rarely does like a sexual offense, like if a pastor, has a sexual offense, it's devastating. It's a big blow to a church, or, gambling or whatever kind of addictions that we've seen people fall from graces.
Yeah.
Rarely does that like fully destroy a church, but gossip probably is somewhere. If like a church is destroyed and dies or splits or something like that, usually gossip can be found somewhere webbed in to that destruction that happens. And so it is one of those things that happens even between churches, right? Like, so we'll share about like what another church is doing and maybe we'll voice it as like, well, I'm just comparing and contrasting what they're doing. But even as members of churches, it's like we want to like gossip about another, like our family, a family member who that's what they are, but to try to like, it's a superiority complex to say why,
like disguise it as concern.
Yeah. Like why what I am involved in is superior, like why I am or why the organization that I am a part of is superior to another person or organization, because it makes us feel good and more superior to other people. And so it's difficult.
Yeah, I was kind of taking a deep dive on this because when we first decided to talk about gossip, I was kind of like rolled my eyes a little bit and was just like, whatever, I don't know, like, does this really matter? Are people really thinking about it? And I was like a little bit convicted because the more I just kind of dived into it, I was finding these examples and I was just kind of drawing my own parallels somewhat. But there's a story of Uzzah who was transporting the ark in the Bible, and the ark shifted in the Ark of the Covenant. Ark of the Covenant. Sorry, he wasn't transporting Noah's Ark.
Yes. He's not the one that took it to Ohio.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the ark shifted or whatever while they were traveling, and he reached back to adjust it or stop it, and he died because God said, "Don't touch the ark." Right? Like that was the commandment. It was a sacred thing. It's kind of like the temple is a sacred thing, and there's just rules that were set that, when God commands it, like we're supposed to obey. We're supposed to follow that. And I think if you look in the scripture, there's so many examples of our tongues being unwieldy and whatnot. And I think that example of Uzzah just kind of made me think how serious that can really be. And we don't take it serious sometimes. And like, especially gossip, like Alex is saying, against our family and the other church, like we're just like, it's almost like we're trying to hurt the temple of God. Like we're trying to damage it intentionally, whether we look at it that way or not, but it's like a sacred thing that we are intentionally attacking, whether we want to admit it or not. And so I think sometimes that's where gossip within the church or within other churches is even worse. Or if I'm gossiping about, Alex, like, he's a brother in Christ, and here I am taking a sacred thing and I'm damaging it, and I never really looked at it that way. And it convicted me so much when I looked at it that way. Cause I was just like, this is way more serious than I think we want to admit sometimes.
Oh yeah. And just trying to think of like from the perspective of like, how does God view that person? Like obviously how we want God, God views people. He loves them. He's forgiven them. He, you know, he views this person in a certain way. Am I viewing them in that way? Or am I kind of going against basically what God is, you know, his work that he's doing in that person's life, or, you know, and how he views that person. And another thing that I thought about is, you know, the verse where it's like, don't let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. But then it was like, only what is helpful for building others up, and then that it may benefit those who listen. And that last part kind of just hit me differently this time when I read it. It's like, how is that going to benefit someone who I'm talking to about another person? And so I just think about like my husband. He's so good about just like being like, okay, you need to like take a minute, like think about like what you're saying, like you really are just, you know, have a lot of emotion going into this, and like I'm sure that person didn't mean anything, you know. He's really good at that, and I hate it because I'm like, no, you just need to listen and let me tell you these
and
things.
validate me.
Yeah. But he's really good about that. But I've never really thought about, anytime you're gossiping, are you really helping the person that's sitting across from you? Like, and how is it benefiting them? Like, that's just an interesting part of that verse that I've never really noticed or thought about before.
Yeah, that's good. I think, like you were saying, Eric, there are a lot of passages, and I think James talks a lot about that, the power of life and death being in our tongue. And I think gossip, it attacks, and you were kind of alluding this too, Rachel, it attacks the image that God is bearing in all of us. Like it's innuendos or, you know, sneaky ways to attack someone that's an image bearer. And whether that person is a brother or sister in Christ, whether they have, you know, dedicated their life to Christ and they're a Christian or not, that person is still an image bearer of Christ. And so even for me this week, one of the things that I read, and I can fall into it so easily on social media. So like one of the things I saw on Twitter the other day was Jen Hatmaker is getting a divorce. And so I'm like, is this even gossip now to talk about it? But she put it out there and published it.
So it's been validated.
So it's been validated.
I'm just going to raise my hand, and I'm going to play the role of
know.
other listeners who might not know who that is.
So she's a Christian writer. Okay. I've never really followed her, you know, super well. And her husband's a pastor. They did like even, I think, some TV shows together, you know, around on TLC or something like that. I don't know. So I don't know a lot about her, but I saw it and I'm like, ooh, click that link, you know, because what happened, and I wanted to follow and figure out what happened. And she hadn't validated it yet, and all these people are jumping on the lady that's like, I can't believe you put that out there. But like so much of that, as I step back, like I don't care like about her, like not like she's terrible and I don't love her as a sister in Christ, but I'm like, what am I doing? Like what paper trail am I following right now to make myself feel better? Like, is that like, what's the motivation that I'm chasing this and kind of like in a weird way, not excited that she's failing, but like, oh, just another one failing, and not like building that person up? Or why didn't I first go to like, that's heartbreaking. You know, it's like, give me more, you know, give me more popcorn versus like, oh, that's a heartbreaking thing in that person's life. And so what in my heart like creates a landing pad for gossip is like one of those things that I'm like, good. How have I set myself up to be like that? And am I one of the people that very easily someone could come to and be like, I can give that person information because, and I think sometimes I've tried to disguise that as like, well, a lot of people come to me because I'm a pastor or because I'm a good listener, but probably a lot of times it's just because I don't reject their gossip, you know, and I don't like put an end to it. And that's not loving that person well at all. And so that's one of the things I've been wrestling through as we've even decided, because like you, as we talked about, I'm like, yeah, it's something in the church that's a big deal, but I'm like, I probably don't want to talk about it because I'm probably worse at it than I'd like to admit. And now I got to work at getting better at it. Dang it.
Yeah.
And gossip has been around, I mean, the beginning of the Bible. Like, the serpent was saying things that were not true about the Lord to Adam and Eve. And it's like, it's been around since the first book of the Bible. And I was reading in Luke 5, Jesus is calling the disciples, and he had in that same chapter is he healed the paralyzed man, and the Pharisees are also around watching him, and these are like religious leaders. They're very into like obedience and the Jewish law. And so they see our Savior walking around doing these miracles, and they question him. And what do? Like they start talking, and that gossip spread. And it says, I'm paraphrasing because it's not in front of me, but they came from all over to see what was happening. And instead of like seeing him as the Messiah and believing him, they were talking amongst themselves. And they said, he speaking blasphemy, who can forgive? Who is this person they're talking? And I thought it was interesting, like what Jesus did, because he didn't go up and embarrass these people. He questioned them, and he asks a why question. He's like, why are you doing this? And that over and over again, we see Jesus doing this in the Bible. It was the story of when they brought the lady to Jesus, and they said, look at her, she's done all these things. And he said, he who sinned casts the first stone. Like he shuts down the gossip that's happened, the lies that have been perpetuated. And it's like, man, we have such an example of somebody that was around people that were gossiping and falling into that trap. And I mean, he sets a great example for us to follow.
That's good. I feel like that's such a hard thing to do when you're sitting across from someone, though. It's like, easy to talk about it, but when you're sitting across from someone.
So for me, I've had to change my mindset. So I have thought of myself as like I'm a gatekeeper. Like we have responsibilities, like when people come to us, and it's like I'm responsible, like you're trusting me, and I am responsible for the information that you're giving me to protect you. So I don't need to go and get anything from Alex, because that's not the priority. It's you're the priority. Like you're a child of God. What you tell me, I respect that, and I'm protecting that. And that has to take precedence over me needing to get anything from sharing that information with somebody else. But it's a mind shift that we have to start, I think, making in that. That's something that I'm working on, those two words, gatekeeper versus like being a messenger or whatever you want to put in there.
Yeah.
And it can be so destructive, and it can be one of those things that we try to, I think we hit on a little bit, but we try to hide it in ways that justify it. Especially, we've talked a lot about when it's not true, like when we're gossiping about something that's not true, but a lot of times gossip is true.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of times the things we're sharing is true. And I saw there was a quote from Craig Rochelle that I thought was really applicable here, where he says, everything that is true doesn't need to be said, but everything we say should be true. And I thought,
that's
like,
good.
even if you flip that to everything we say should be true, but everything that is true doesn't need to be said. And I thought, that struck me right at the core, because I'm kind of like Mr. Truth Teller. Like I don't care, just say the truth. Like the truth will set you free. Like I want to know the truth. I don't want it sugar-coated. But then when you think about it, like, maybe there are instances where this truth is destructive, and I don't need to just be telling people this about someone else.
Yeah, and I think of the little boy who cried wolf, right? That he went and told everybody that there was a wolf, and then just there never was. No one trusted him. I can think of people probably, and maybe we all can, that I'm like, that's a gossip. Like I hear gossip, and I'm like, there's a name that I think of. Yeah. And for me, who do you think I'm never going to tell something to is that person, like for me in my own relationships with that person, I'm like, I can't, like, if you're coming to me and you're the person that's always giving me the information about everyone else, like instantly like a red or yellow flag goes up. I'm like, you're a person you're not a safe person for me to share information with.
Yeah. What are you telling others about me?
Yeah. And so there's that side that I don't think we understand. That's a double-edged sword, is like, you probably don't have a lot of great relationships with, and I can see that in even some of the people I'm thinking of, is like, they don't have a lot of close friends, and why they're doing this, I think, is because they're longing to be accepted and approved. And even when I've done it in my life, it's longing for acceptance and approval and somebody to validate me. Yeah. But what my actions are doing are actually ostracizing me from people, and nobody wants to trust me, and I'm the boy who cried wolf. And so that's the ramifications. And I think that sin often like sucks us in and says, this is a good thing, it's alluring, it dangles the carrot, and then we're like, oh man, that was to my demise. And so
Yeah.
I think like a personal story from me, I was very young. I was a manager at this Christian bookstore that grew really fast, and maybe like grew too fast, and we had to lay off some people after the holiday season. And it's kind of a family deal. Like I worked for family, and when they told me, I thought in my young kind of naive brain that, okay, I know all these people who are going to be getting let go. They're not going to find out for like a week or whatever it was. It was some period of time. And like my gut reaction was, I need to tell them because they need to start looking for a job now. Like I was thinking like, oh, this is probably, I shouldn't let them, we should tell them now. So I was, I had this disagreement thinking that we shouldn't be waiting. We should tell them now. So one of the people I knew was getting laid off, I went and talked to him about it, and I alluded to the fact that this might be coming, and it wasn't a lie. I wasn't trying to spread it because just to gossip. I literally and legitimately
Like
had
had
care
care.
for
Yeah.
that person.
Yeah.
That person went ahead and started telling the whole staff that people were getting laid off, and it blew up into this big thing. I almost got fired because of it. And it's just, looking back on it, like it was like one of those pivotal moments in my life when I was like, okay, there are certain times when even though it is true and even though it affects people, like you just can't, it's just, you have to wait to talk. Like you have to wait to share that truth, and it's scary. And sometimes it doesn't always feel right, but I do think that there's wisdom in waiting. Before we wrap up this conversation, like what are some like practical ways? I think we kind of touched on them. Are there any like easy takeaways we can give people for maybe catching themselves before they spread gossip or?
I know this is something that I was thinking about in this conversation of just like, there's so many practical ways and like areas that I can grow in my own like gossip and how I talk about people. But I think one thing that's really hard for me is like when someone's sitting across from me and sharing something with me. Like in high school, I went through a phase where I was like, oh, you're gossiping. You need to stop gossiping, and like would do that to people. And I know that is just like so annoying and like
it's really annoying. I probably do it all the time still. And it's just,
yeah. But I probably did it at times when it wasn't necessary, and I just think that's such a hard balance for me is trying to figure out when do I kind of step in and be like, hey, like maybe we should, I don't know. It's just like, how do you do that gracefully without making them feel, because I feel like if someone said that to me, it's easy to feel, oh man, I feel really guilty and like bad, which obviously, shouldn't be doing it. But I don't know. That's just like a hard situation to be graceful in and help someone kind of realize. I don't know.
I think our emotions have a lot to do with how we gossip, how we talk about each other. It's like, normally it's when you're feeling really good, like there's like something really exciting or really juicy, or you're
Angry,
upset or frustrated at something. So Wendell brought this up a couple days ago. Wendell Nelson from across the way,
Dr. Wendell Nelson.
And he was talking about the Psalms, and he's like, a lot of times in the Psalms, like we see somebody praising or lamenting, but who are they talking to? Like who are they talking to first? And the Psalms were written to God.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, normally when I want to talk about something, I'm being charged by an emotion. And Dallas Willard says, feelings are, with few exceptions, they're good servants, but they're disastrous masters. So it's like just thinking about like, who are we being, what emotions are we being mastered by? And maybe just even being more conscientious of pausing, like how am I feeling right now? Like, what are my emotions? Am I frustrated? Have I talked to God about this?
Yeah.
Very simply.
Yeah.
Like changing our mindset.
Good.
Yeah, I think for me, a couple things are like just remembering that other people are image bearers of God. And
so good.
And I think the difficult part is like we know the right answers in a lot of this, but it's like to actually apply it, it's difficult. It's like treat others the way you want to be treated. I don't want to be talked bad about, yet like it's so easy to do. And so much of that.
You told everyone about my chocolate addiction.
Yeah, I told everyone. Now they all know. It's going to be all over the Twitter sphere. So I think that's the difficult part is it's such a thing that can master us, you know, and like you talked about emotions mastering us, and James, he talks about like the tongue being it's like the rudder of a boat, and it's such a small piece, but life and death literally comes from it, and so much disaster and good can come from it. And so for me, one of the steps, I'm like, okay, when I hear am I going to be a landing zone for it? How do I say that's not your story to tell? You know, I think that's one of the things I've been trying to get better at. Like, okay, it's not your story to tell, it's their story to tell, and if they want to come to me, you know, you can do that. But so how do I not be a landing zone that I'm building mistrust with people? But I think the other thing is, how am I viewing that person? And when I am tempted to, how can I use my tongue in a life-giving way? You know, so how do I redeem even the situation? How do I see somebody that drives me crazy? Or like when I said the gin hat maker thing, like I'm like, oh, I want to like celebrate in someone else's defeat. How do I change that and say, okay, this is a person made in God's image, and how do I actually celebrate them and have affirmation and send that instead of what I'm feeling? And so how do I celebrate that part of who they are, whether they're Christian or not? Yeah. Again, they are made in the image of God. And so we say we get that as believers, but the way we act towards a lot of people and spew on people and hateful and towards, for whatever reasons, social media, political stuff, we say we get it, but man, we do not treat people like that.
I think that's a key reminder too, is that this isn't just about your friends or your neighbors. This transcends that to all humans, whether it's TMZ garbage, celebrity gossip, whether it's political candidates that you disagree with, like the slander and the gossip that we spread. Yeah, they're all image bearers of God, whether you agree with them or not. And I think but one scripture that stood out to me when I was looking at some of this is like kind of a classic, Matthew 18:15, that says, if your brother or sister go and point out their fault, or if your brother and sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. And I think that's like maybe a kind of to your point, Alex, there's like a couple good questions you can ask those people when those conversations come up. And I thought, man, I need to like practice this. And that is, A, like, why are you telling me this? Yeah. And B, have you had a chance to talk to them about this before you just like came and talked to me? And it's hard to do that because it feels confrontational, right? You feel like you're having this difficult confrontation, but in the long run, it'll probably be better, because so many times those gossipy conversations, I know for me personally, have just come around to bite me. Yeah. All right. I think that does it for us today. Thanks, guys, for having this conversation. It was enlightening and challenging, way more than it was when I rolled my eyes at the topic early on. I think it's something that can challenge all of us if we take it to heart. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody who's listening or watching. We'd appreciate to hear from you. If you have questions, concerns, comments, suggestions, you can reach out to us on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.